Today we'll be taking a look at another fancy Ravenwing Landspeeder. It's time to unleash a plasma storm. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today we're continuing our look through the units available to the Dark Angels, with a focused look at the Landspeeder Vengeance. This is the enormous Ravenwing Landspeeder. That's the dual kit that can be built as either the Dark Shroud, or this one with its enormous Plasma Storm battery on top of the model. We'll take a look at its rules, any obvious buffs or synergies on the table, and how I would run it myself in a game of 40k. In the background, the Vengeance is built from an STC that was rediscovered in Millennium 36. Since then, the Dark Angels have used this in support of their Ravenwing to provide very highly mobile, heavy weapons fire support to their Ravenwing attack squadrons. Its deadly Plasma Storm battery can be fired either in a rapid burst or a slower supercharged blast that punches through enemy armour with ease. Very nasty, so let's see what it can do on the tabletop. So the Landspeeder Vengeance is a fast attack choice for Codex Dark Angels. At its cheapest points cost, it'll cost you 100 points when it's armed with a heavy bolter, or 112 points if you equip it with an assault cannon. Compared with other Landspeeders, it's a little bit tougher. It's got a movement of 12 inches, weapon skill and ballistic skill 3 up, strength 4, toughness 6, 9 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 8 and a 3 up save. It's equipped with a Plasma Storm battery, and either that heavy bolter or assault cannon that we mentioned. So a pretty mobile, fairly durable Landspeeder that's main function is a gun platform. So that Plasma Storm battery is a 36-inch range, heavy D6 weapon with a strength 7, AP-3 and a flat damage 2. You can of course supercharge it to gain strength 8 and flat damage 3, but if you make a hit roll of 1 when you roll to hit with this vehicle, then the bearer suffers 3 mortal wounds after all this weapon's shots have been resolved. Furthermore, the Plasma Storm battery can't fire for the rest of the battle if this unfortunate state of affairs comes to pass. So that Plasma Storm has a pretty fearsome profile. If you do happen to overcharge it, it's pretty decent in terms of damage output point for point, and against your standard toughness 7 vehicle will be very similar to firing D6 las cannon shots at them. Not too bad for an 100 point vehicle. Its efficiency does drop off fairly considerably though when you go down to standard fire, and if you do that then it's probably best off aiming against multi-wound infantry such as intercessors or something similar. Though it could certainly still chip in against light vehicles, particularly ones that have toughness 6 like this Landspeeder, or enemy flyers for example. In your Dark Angels heavy doctrine it'll typically have 42-inch range, meaning that it's pretty happy staying back. In terms of the assault cannon or heavy bolter, I could happily pick up either of them. It really just depends on how hard you want this thing to hit, as piling extra guns on it will of course make it have more efficient damage output, but will be less durable point for point, because those extra guns aren't adding extra durability, but they are adding points cost. I'd say that upgrading to the assault cannon is probably going to be strongest when you're buffing it by other sources. Maybe say if this guy's flying around with Samael or Talon Masters, so that every shot is really quite accurate. He does have some special rules. He has the Jinx special rule, meaning that if he advances, then he can get a 4+ invul save, which is a very significant boost to his durability, and you can of course activate this in other ways through stratagems. He also has Shock Assault, meaning he'll be 4 strength 4 attacks on the charge for what it's worth, and Combat Doctrines, meaning that Plasma Storm battery will usually be AP-4, and in the Dark Angels Devastator Doctrine will have the boosted range that we mentioned. He has the normal Explode special rule, where when he dies on a 6, everyone around him will suffer D3 mortal wounds. So overall, pretty heavy firepower, good durability for a Landspeeder, but fairly mediocre durability compared with other similar vehicles of its points cost. I think it's interesting that the Landspeeder Vengeance is obviously on such a fast chassis, as you're really not going to want to overcharge that Plasma Storm battery if you're taking a -1 to hit, or you're very likely just going to be not firing it for the rest of the game. There are a few ways around this though, as we'll talk about in a second. So how can we buff this thing to get more out of it on the tabletop? We've already mentioned the innate buffs it gets from the Dark Angels unique doctrine, but Grim Resolve is also quite a powerful one. If you're happy for it to stay still for a turn, then rerolling 1s is obviously just what this Plasma Storm battery wants if you are overcharging the thing. If you do have a source of reroll 1s, then you're not very likely to kill the plasma gun and deal yourself the mortal wounds each turn, but it's certainly not impossible. If you do the maths, which are actually fairly complicated, he has just over a 9% chance to blow himself up each time that he fires on overcharge, even if you have reroll ones. So to be honest, that is still a disturbingly high chance, and you could certainly lose a plasma battery straight off the first time that you fire it if you get a bit unlucky. There are plenty of characters that have good synergy with the Landspeeder Vengeance. Obviously, Samael and Sableclaw and Talon Masters can provide you a whole ton of rerolls that will make your Plasma Storm battery far more accurate, and also buff your heavy bolters and assault cannons. Samael giving full rerolls to the Landspeeder Vengeance is a little bit of a mixed blessing though, because when you're rerolling 1s and 2s, you actually have about twice the likelihood of rolling those 1s, giving you a more or less 17% or 1/6 chance of detonating your plasma battery in any one turn. Though of course it will mean that you get more damage out of the plasma battery each turn that you fire it. Talon Masters on the other hand will give you both ignores cover and reroll 1s to wound, both of which are very nice buffs and makes the firepower even more solid. Chaplains could be a good pairing with the Vengeance as well, as a +1 to hit litany is one of the ways that you can avoid your plasma weaponry overcharging, as you won't be able to roll a 1 on that result in any circumstances. Finally, Tech Marines could be useful to loiter around some Landspeeders to potentially repair them, and if you are going quite heavy into Landspeeders, it probably makes sense to have a Dark Shroud around to make all of them -1 to hit, as compared with other 100 to 110 point vehicles, the Vengeance isn't really all that tough. Like all the other Ravenwing units, the Vengeance can also be part of a Ravenwing attack squadron. The formation from Vigilus Defiant that costs 1 command point to access. The main thing that it gains from this is access to the stratagem Signal the Attack. This costs 1 command point and you use it after you've inflicted 1 wound on a certain target, and for the rest of the phase, all the other Ravenwing attack squadron units get +1 to hit that target. Again, this is very important, as it's a way that you can safely overcharge that plasma gun without it having any chance of exploding. From Ritual of the Damned, the Ravenwing have gained some interesting options, including the Warlord trait Impeccable Mobility. This one's also great for Landspeeder Vengeances, because it's an aura of 6 inches where Ravenwing can ignore the penalty for moving and shooting with heavy weapons, thus allowing your Landspeeder Vengeance to move and not get the -1 to hit penalty on the Plasma Storm battery, allowing it to overcharge more. Certainly a good pairing. As for other stratagems, the Ravenwing have a lot. It's good to have quite so many flexible options. We have a couple of Landspeeder bonuses to other units shooting. Firstly, targeting protocols from Ritual of the Damned. This is the one that allows all your Dark Angels units full rerolls to hit on a single unit that's within 12 inches of a Ravenwing Landspeeder. The Vengeance is a Landspeeder and therefore could trigger this. Having more Landspeeders on the table means that you're more likely to have units where they need to be to trigger this stratagem off, and it's an absolutely solid one for buffing all of your Dark Angels firepower. There's also the slightly less useful Data Link Telemetry one, which could allow your Whirlwind to auto-hit for a shooting phase. Not quite as powerful, but still an option. Weapons from the Dark Age is of course a really solid buff to any plasma-bearing unit's firepower, and the Vengeance is no exception. Obviously it's slightly helpful against all targets, but the main advantage on a Vengeance, I think, is whenever you're either targeting 3 wound infantry and you don't want to overcharge, so you can get the Vengeance to damage 3 without overcharging the Plasma Storm, or if you need to try and kill some 4 wound infantry, like those Space Marine Centurions that we're seeing around all over the place these days, you could potentially have that popping a Centurion every single wound that gets through. If you do have rerolls of 1 to hit, weapons of the Dark Age will generally net you around about 1.5 to 2 wounds extra on average on your target. It's not a bad buff, but in all honesty, you are going to get more out of weapons from the Dark Age on a squad with more plasma weapons, such as Hellblasters, Inceptors, or the Repulsor Executioner, just because these things all fire more plasma shots, and weapons from the Dark Age increases the damage of each plasma shot by 1, so you get more out of it if you put it on a bigger unit. That being said, it isn't a bad damage boost, it's just it might be better served for you elsewhere. Other stratagem options the Vengeance has are Speed of the Raven. This allows you to shoot even if you advanced, which could get you that 4-up invul save from Jink, should you want to pile some extra protection on the Vengeance and keep its firepower. Armour of Contempt could be used to shrug some mortal wounds, and Big Guns Never Tire could be used to ignore the penalty for moving and shooting heavy weapons. So how would I run these guys on the tabletop? Personally, if I was taking one of these, I'd be very tempted to take 3. They're quite cheap, and if your opponent decides that one is a threat to him, it's not very hard to remove one of these vengeances, even if you have a 4+ invul save. I could happily either run the heavy bolter or assault cannon, but I'd keep them all the same, otherwise your opponent's just going to focus the ones with the expensive assault cannons, so they won't get to shoot as much. From there, you're really going to have to try and look at a way to mitigate the chance of overcharging and blowing yourself up. I think that impeccable mobility trait alongside a Ravenwing Talon Master is a really solid pick along with these, as it can keep them having that decent movement, repositioning and staying out of harm's way, while still keeping up firepower and getting to overcharge if necessary. You absolutely need a source of rerolls from somewhere as well. Either just plan to remain stationary all game and use Grim Resolve, or just not overcharge, or have maybe a Master with a jump pack alongside, or perhaps Samael and Sableclaw, though as we mentioned this does only provide moderate protection against blowing yourself up, compared with just standard reroll ones. I'd certainly want to field them as part of a Ravenwing attack squadron to give myself the best chance of using the Signal the Attack stratagem to allow me to safely overcharge with these guys as well. Maybe using something like a Talon Master to shave a wound or two off a hard target, and then letting rip with 3 Plasma Storms. In game I'd likely want to cluster them up alongside whichever characters I'm using to buff them. I think I'd certainly use a Talon Master alongside them, and then either Samael or a Jump Pack Master. We'd want to keep them fairly well screened from enemy close combat threats, as they're going to go down very easily to anything that has a reasonable amount of muscle. But between 12-inch movement and that impeccable mobility trait, we should be able to keep them in range and out of harm's way. If and when your opponent does start shooting at them, I'd certainly consider the stratagem from Ritual of the Damned that allows them to get a 4+ invul when targeted. I believe it's high speed focus for 1 command point, and I think I forgot to mention that one earlier. This one's quite a nice reactive stratagem, so when your opponent declares they're firing a whole load of las cannons or something at one of your vengeances, you can happily wave goodbye to half that firepower, safe behind your 4+ invul. The Plasma Storm's going to be happiest hitting heavy targets or elite infantry with 2 or 3 wounds, and the heavy bolter or assault cannon can chip away at infantry as the game goes on, and I wouldn't underestimate the value of getting a Landspeeder within 12 inches to issue that targeting protocol stratagem and give your whole army rerolls to hit against that unit. I think in general the Landspeeder Vengeance is a unit that really lives or dies by the amount of synergies that you can put on it, and between Warlord traits, decent character support, maybe a Landspeeder Dark Shroud, and some stratagem investment, these guys could operate with some really scary firepower and punch well above the weight for their points cost. I do think to get proper value out of the Vengeances though, you will generally have to be overcharging. D6 strength 7 2 damage shots on a reasonably fragile platform just isn't really going to cut it. It'll certainly put a dent in elite infantry, but if that was all you were going to do with it, you might be better off with something else like say Vindicator tanks, which are another D6 profile, but instead of just tickling heavy infantry can also vaporize heavy tanks too. Other competitors for the Vengeance's role could be the Ravenwing Flyers, particularly the Dark Talon, who's very fast moving and packs very decent firepower and can access a whole ton of the Ravenwing Synergies that we've talked about in this video, all without the chance of blowing its own weapon up. It does cost significantly more though, and is arguably even more fragile than the Vengeance, so it's not without its own drawbacks. Overall, I think that the Vengeance is a really interesting unit, and it's certainly got a lot stronger, both with the points drop in Chapter Approved, and with the whole host of new tactical options that we've just gained in Ritual of the Damned, that can really make it shine and can operate as the mobile deadly firepower that it's supposed to be in the background. We'll be continuing our Dark Angels series in the near future. I think we will be looking at the Dark Talon next, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to follow along with us. I do have a Patreon page. If you've been enjoying all the hours of content I've been making, it would certainly be greatly appreciated if you could support the channel. And of course a big thank you to my current patrons who are allowing me to focus on making videos like this. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next episode.